Oh, we got bigger.
Hi.
I think that means we're live.
We are. Hi, everyone. Welcome virtually to Powell's, and thanks for joining us for tonight's Orbit Live event with Brent Weeks and Django Wexler. Brent Weeks is the author of the Night Angel trilogy and the Lightbringer series, which has now concluded with The Burning White, out in paperback this month. Django Wexler is the author of a number of fantasy novels, most recently Ashes of the Sun, which Orbit published in July. If you click on the Order Signed Books link at the bottom of the screen, you'll be able to order both books from Powell's. Your order of The Burning White will come with a signed book plate. We're also offering signed book plates to anyone who purchases Ashes of the Sun from Powell's. For those, you'll need to fill out the form that is also linked if you click Order Signed Books. This event is part of Brent's Burning White paperback tour, and there are 2 more events coming up. They're all open to the public, so check out the listings in the event description if you'd like to join those other events. But, of course, be sure to buy your books from Powell's tonight. This event is being recorded, and a replay will be available at the same link you used to enter the event after it's over. If you have to leave early and want to watch the rest later, or just want to share the replay with friends, you can do that using this link. Brent and Django are going to be talking about fantasy world building. They'll also be taking your questions. I see that a few of you have already entered questions. If you haven't yet, you can click on the Ask a Question button to add one. You can also vote on everyone else's questions so that the most popular ones are answered first. And now I am delighted to turn things over to Brent and Django. Take it away.
Hey, everybody. And I'm Django Wexler. This is Brent Weeks.
I'm Brent Weeks.
First of all, congratulations, Brent, on this release. This has got to be, how long have you been working on this series?
Well, so today I think marks the 10th anniversary of publication. So it took me 11 or 12 years. Yeah. I say I spent my 30s. I spent my 30s on this. So completing it has felt like an enormous relief, actually. At times, I don't know if you get this feeling sometimes when you're writing a book, like, am I ever going to be done with this? Like, this is never going to happen.
Everyone gets that. Everyone who writes a book.
Right. So it was wonderful to be like, okay, I did that thing, and then of course it was like, well, now what? That's kind of where I'm at now. So
whenever I finish a project, I'm always like, wait, I used to do other things. What do I do now? Wasn't there things that I did in my life, not this?
Right. Yeah, I mean, especially when you're in sort of the publication crunch, and if you miss a few deadlines here and there, those things that some people meet, I guess. Things can get very challenging. So you just had a book come out just last month, is that right?
Yeah, Ashes of the Sun. It's a new series from Orbit. I'm very excited about it.
That's fantastic. So I want to hear more about that. But like, how has it been launching a book during all this coronavirus stuff versus every other book? Like, that seems like everything would be 5 times as hard.
It's been a little bit of both. I mean, the main difference is no con. Usually I try to go to a couple of conventions right around launch time, just to, show the flag and be on panels and do signings so people can sign stuff if they want. But so I haven't done any of that this year.
Right.
And I do launch events at bookstores, but that's usually just my friends. So it's not like, I don't feel like I'm missing anything sort of book-wise. Obviously, it's hard not meeting with my friends, but that's more general. In a way, it's actually weirdly been better because, I'm not big enough to do like a physical book tour where I fly around to a bunch of cities. But we've done a lot of events like this, and so I feel like I've actually seen more people this way because we didn't normally do this, and obviously people are more used to doing Zoom events now, or I guess this isn't Zoom, but whatever, virtual events. So it's been mixed. It's been a lot of fun though. It's trying new things for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it looks like you're. It looks like this book is getting. Looks like bigger events might be coming your way, book tours, because looks like you're kind of hitting the ground running. You got a starred review from Booklist. People. publishes weekly, calling it a powerful start. People, you got lots of authors talking about how it's fast-paced, entertaining, great world building, well-developed, diverse character, fantasy at its finest. Sounds like it's going really well. Can you tell me more about the kind of about the world? There's a Star Wars hook in there, or angle, we'll say.
So I'm trying to think how to start here. It kind of came from watching Star Wars, and specifically the Star Wars prequels, and seeing how the Jedi take younglings at age like 5 and have them join the Jedi Order. But the Jedi Order isn't like, it's not just like the karate school at the mall, right? This is an order of ascetic warrior knights who take like vows. People don't sign up for that at age 5. They get sent there. And in Star Wars, the Jedi are the heroes and they have the Force to guide them, so it all kind of works out. But I wanted to sort of examine that in the context of a world where maybe people don't always have the right intentions. And so it's this story about these two kids, a younger sister and an older brother, and the sister has this magic potential and gets taken away by the Order, who is, manages these things. And the brother tries to stop them and is badly wounded in the process. And he sort of dedicates his life to rebellion and goes looking for forbidden magic to try and break their stranglehold. Whereas she sort of grows up in this order to be a sort of true believer in their cause of defending right and justice. And then they come back together when they're both in their, late teens, early 20s, and that's how it works out. So that was the central concept of that book, world building. To get into world building as a thing, I guess one of the sort of base question is like, how do you go about it? Because I'm always interested to hear this, because every writer does it differently. So like when you get started on a project like this, how do you go about digging into the world building? Like, when do you do it? Is it the beginning? Is it once you got characters down?
Well, I wish I had a neat and tidy answer for this.
It's never neat and tidy, right?
I should probably just make up something to make myself look better. For me, the world building came from just I guess it started with some restlessness. I was like, okay, I made all these decisions with the Night Angel trilogy, which I'd started writing, in college. And so I just, when you're first starting your first novel, like you just have to when you write any novel, you have to make a ton of decisions. And so you just make a ton, and then you go with it. And then afterwards you might look back and be like, I made that, unconsciously, or I didn't think about that decision, and I don't really like how it turned out, but I'm kind of stuck with it. Like for me, one of the decisions that's kind of minor, but now it's coming back to bite me again, was having names with apostrophes in them, right? And that was a huge thing in fantasy when we were growing up, or when I was growing up. I'm probably a little older than you. And you just see it all over the place. And I used it in mine. I didn't use it like all over the place, and I use it in a few places. I mean, for contractions, but also to help you know how to pronounce something. It's like, okay, how do I pronounce this? So okay, if I put the apostrophe in there, then I can come up with a world building reason why it needs to be there. A linguistic reason why it needs to be there, but really it's partly also to help you, like Kakari. Okay, K-A-K, is that Kakari? How do you say that? So part of the reasons I use apostrophes was simply I'd seen it done a lot. I thought that's what you did in fantasy, and then after I got done with the Night Angel trilogy, I was kind of like, man, I'm kind of sick of apostrophes, and like it just makes me want to jab my leg with a fork every time I see one. And so it's like, okay, well, I can make a new world, and I was like, okay, I want to not do in Night Angel, things start as sort of pseudo-European, and it broadens out, but which had some good ideas. But I was like, I want to do something different than that, and I want to do a slightly different time period. And so I was reading up on Renaissance Italy, and about the Borgia family, which is this really amazing family, all full of backstabbers and poisoners and popes, really bad popes. I think Alexander the Seventh was I think he's the guy. It's been a few years. He was one of my inspirations for Andros Guile. And so I was like, oh well, wouldn't it be fun to do a completely different world? Instead of sort of a low magic world, we'll do a high magic world. Instead of this really dark world, we're going to do a colorful world. Instead of a European inspired thing, I'll do a Mediterranean inspired thing. And instead of a medieval time period, I want to do like an early Renaissance sort of late 1500s, 1600s Mediterranean Sea basin area. So you have tons of cultures, and then you have rudimentary firearms, guns, and magic all together, and that to me sounded really fun. So I just kind of started from there, and then I was like, okay, how can we go from here? And that's where I started. I started with that set of ideas, and then I sort of explored it, and then explored the cultures as I went from there. How do you generally do it? And how did you do it? How did you start this time when you were taking on this sort of Star Wars flavored or Star Wars inspired, loosely Star Wars inspired, let's say, world?
It's interesting because I feel like I had the same sort of experience you did, where I wrote my first novel and it was same sort of thing, very sort of Northern Europe, without even really thinking about it, knights and castles and lords. I don't think you have all that in Night Angel, but you know what I mean. That sort of general setting that we all are very familiar with. And even apostrophes. Have you ever read Neil Stephenson's Ream?
I haven't read that one. No.
There's a great riff in that book about apostrophes in fantasy. I should find it and take a picture. It's like only a page or two, but it's these two fantasy authors, one of whom is like an academic, and the other one is putting all these apostrophes in their shared work. And he's like, what are all these apostrophes even for? It's really funny. But I guess possibly to my advantage, that book was published by a small press, and no one has ever really read it. And so by the time I got around to writing for a big New York press, I had kind of gotten that out of the way. And I was kind of in the position you're in, where I'm like, I don't want to do that again. And oddly, I ended up in a not dissimilar place, because my first series, Shadow Campaigns, is Napoleonic War, right? So that's past early firearms and into full-on muskets and flintlocks.
Right.
And so that was a lot of fun, and it really got me into using historical bases for things, which is something I've always liked to do. For Ashes, it was a little different because I had the story and the kind of like the societal conditions that I wanted to talk about, like this idea of what do people who are born with magical talent owe the world? Is it fair to force them to do things? Maybe, is it fair if they become really dangerous if you don't train them? That sort of thing. And so I needed a world design that sort of supported that. And so I kind of built the world around that. That's one of my favorite things about fantasy, is that you can sort of tweak the world design to support the kind of story you want to tell. The example I always use is in Shadow Campaigns, the magic is very low magic, because I was doing this sort of military thing, and I wanted that to be a focus. And so it wouldn't work if you had sort of Wheel of Time, Malazan, Book of the Fallen, destroy armies with the wave of your hand magic. Because all that stuff, all the cannons and whatnot feel irrelevant because the magicians can just do everything. So when I came to Ashes, which is a much more high magic setting, I feel like I kind of wanted it to be way more gonzo. So Ashes is a fantasy post-apocalypse, is the way I typically describe it.
Nice.
And like, in fantasy novels, the idea that there's was a past civilization that has collapsed and now there's their relics everywhere is pretty common. but usually it's like hidden off in the middle of nowhere. There's like a couple of artifacts or like a dungeon or whatever, maybe a few buildings. But like for Ashes, the civilization that has collapsed was like about as advanced or more as our civilization today. Okay. And so when they fell apart, there's just this stuff everywhere. So it's less sort of D&D, Lord of the Rings, and more Mad Max, right? Where there's just these chunks of giant unbreakable metal and, all this crud scattered all over the landscape. And so the people are literally living amidst the ruins, and sort of repurposing things. So they take this metal and make it into armor, and they use these things as lifts or whatever. The main setting of Ashes, the city, is high in the mountains, and a sort of weapon of mass destruction was used and created this giant glowing crater. And then they built the city around the crater because it's warm. It's the only place within hundreds of miles that you can actually live. But of course, then sometimes poisonous gas comes out and kills people, so you gotta be careful.
Right. It makes me think of like Marie Curie. It's like, this is warm. She's holding radium. It's like, no, put it down. Put it down. That's not good. So when you do a post-apocalyptic kind of setting like that, where like it sounds to me, and tell me if this is true, it sounds to me like okay, you're building this current world that might look like kind of crazy and like all sorts of things are happening, but you have to like build not only the first world that we are experiencing, but you also have to build you have to build, well, what was that previous world like? What was that technology? Because otherwise, like, eventually the cracks start to show. Like, if you don't build, like, well, how did their technology work? And then you're like, what is this polar bear doing on the island? That doesn't make any sense. And then it turns out, no, it doesn't make any sense, because you had no idea what you were doing when you did that. It was just an interesting, close for an episode.
We usually don't have the luxury of throwing in a bunch of mysteries and then not being around when the time comes to pay them off. That works better in television.
Right.
If I throw in a mystery in book 1, it's just going to be me in book 3 who has to figure it out. No one else is going to do that. And so yeah, I mean, the past world doesn't need quite as much depth, but it definitely needs, you need to understand it. I don't know. I always like to understand the kind of, you might like, the metaphysics of how magic works, even if it never makes it into the book, because like nobody really cares that much. I think, it always annoys me when some old guy in the book just is like, this is definitely how magic works, and we know this for certain. Because like in real life, no one's ever really that certain. But like, I feel like if I don't know, then people can tell. Yeah. I mean, in terms of magic system, now I'll confess, I have not read any of your new series. I read Night Angel back in the day. But so how does the magic work, and how did you sort of come up with that?
Well, I've done. I really like, actually, kind of the same thing you're talking about. Like, it's, I like that. I like having people be wrong about the magic in world. It makes things. It adds a bunch of problems to us as writers when you do that. It's much better when the magic just works, and then like you look at a chart and it's like, oh, this does this, etc. There's a little bit of play around the edges, but like somebody sits down and explains, Harry, this is how magic works. Well, actually, that's not a systemic magic system, so a systematic magic system. But you know what I mean. Like it's really helpful for the writer when somebody does explain it and it's right, because for readers, when they're reading a magic system and somebody explains the magic, and even if they're sort of uncertain about how they explain it, it turns out they're wrong, then a lot of readers are just like, oh, you're cheating.
Yeah.
Like this magic system is nonsense. And it's like, no. actually, there's a depth of work here, and so you have to do all this stuff to be like, look, like people don't understand how this works, and
that always bugs me because like the magic is essentially the physics of this world, right? It's how their world works, and so that's like saying that in real life, like we just have a complete understanding of how physics works, and like it's not mysterious at all, and we're just like, here it is, and this is correct, and there's no,
yeah, right, and it's sort of like
how the universe works.
It's like Einstein, sitting there and talking with Isaac Newton. Like they're both the smartest guys in the room, but like what Newton understood was absolutely true, and what things he discovered, like Einstein would come along later and be like, well, yeah, but
the top.
yeah, like let's talk about X, Y, and Z, and so I wanted to have a magic system that had that sort of play in it of like I had very much a there's a book I read in college called the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and it just talks about how people understand their own science and how that undergoes revolutions, and then people use different metaphors for their science, and at some point metaphors start to break down and so forth, especially once you get to light. So the base for the magic in the world of Lightbringer is that it sort of works the opposite of a candle. So with a candle, you have physical stuff. A chemical reaction happens, it burns, and you get heat and light and some other things, but don't worry about that. you get heat and light from this physical substance. And so I thought, well, what if you could take light and turn it into physical substances? And then each color of light could be turned into different physical substances. And each of those physical substances had different properties. So you could use it for stuff. But like blue magic would be sort of brittle and smooth, but very strong along one plane of force, but you could just snap it along the other, and so on and so forth. And each one would have different smells. And then I sort of layered on top of that the magic, using magic would also have emotional effects on you. And so if you use magic for a long time, you use green magic for a long time, it makes you more and more wild. So I sort of hooked to help readers out, really, mostly. It's like, okay, I hooked the colors to the emotions that sort of made sense. And then I also hooked them, like rather than having random connections to the colors, it's like, okay, if you're going to have green, then green properties that make sense to help a reader remember would be, okay, it's sort of like springy, it's flexible, like green wood. It's wild, that green for wilderness, that makes sense to me. And then it makes you feel wild. Okay, that also, that makes sense. If you're going to have a magic system with 7 or 9 systems, it's really helpful to give the reader some hooks. So I wanted to give readers hooks to help them remember things, because otherwise the complexity it became a really complicated magic system regardless. But I hoped to introduce readers into it, slowly enough that they could hang with me.
In the interesting thing about doing ashes for me, in terms of creating the magic system, I wanted it to be, after doing the sort of low-powered magic in shadow campaigns, I wanted it to be the sort of strongest thing around, because that's a sort of another Star Wars connection, I guess, which is that, back in the Star Wars prequel, sort of Old Republic era, the Jedi are kind of in charge. Like, they're not literally in charge, but they're kind of in charge. They get made generals in the army. And it's not 100% clear whether that's because it's a good idea or because no one can stop them, right? Because they're these godlike killing machines. And so there's a similar dynamic here where, the Order is theoretically, the guardians of civilization, and they defend humanity against the evil monsters, and they do that. But their magic is such that nothing can stand up to them. And so whether they're in charge because everyone agrees it's for the greater good, or whether they're in charge because nobody wants to be set on fire is a sort of open question.
Right.
Oh, I had something in top of my head. Related, and this is another fantasy world building element that I always love to talk about, is when you do fantasy worlds, do you create like translations of things like calendars and units of distance? There was a big argument about this on Reddit, and I'm of the opinion that you don't have to, but like people sometimes disagree with me.
I don't think it's helpful to do that. In the main, I mean, it's also not helpful to talk about inches or centimeters or something. You know, when you can help it. So it's like if you start referring to, I mean, I had some of those, but I didn't try to use them all the time. Actually, I tried not to use them all the time. It's like paces, everybody can get. Okay, paces, fine. That's sort of invisible, right? Like, okay, it's a yard or it's a meter. It's a pace. You know, like units of measurement like that. When you get into inches or thumbs or thumbs, and like some of those things are like, okay, how much is that? And like I had a whole like system for based on units of 7 and for weight, and it was like nobody's gonna know what the hell this is. You know, like no matter how logically you make it, if you're using it in the text, then people are just like, okay, you know, that's a thing, I guess. And like it gives readers places to stop and be confused. And so I used it a few times. You know, a kid lost a bunch of weight, so yeah, he feels like he's lost almost a sev or whatever. Like fine, but if you dwell on that and you're hitting it constantly, I think it either distracts readers if you're using too many real world measurements, or you're using inches and kilometers or miles. I mean, leagues. I also tend to think, you know, readers kind of read right past it. But I sort of try to downplay those. I have a few holidays at, you know, that were important for the world. Like in world, everything is about this magic. The magic's very important. So the magic is connected to light. So the longest day of the year, Sunday, is very important. Well, it's not very hard to remember. Sunday, longest day of the year, the day with the most sun. Fair enough. Yeah, like, but other than that, and then I would mention just a few times equinoxes. I mentioned the shortest day of the year. You know, like those would be mentioned, but like that's not too hard. That's not too much for the reader to hold in their mind when that's like not the important part of where the writing is going. It's like, okay, there's this big party at Sunday. That matters to all these characters. All you really need to know is it's coming. There's a date, and then let's look at the other stuff. So I some of that world building stuff, I try to do it well enough. Like I might do it in the background, really have it all dialed down and all filled in. But like I don't want it on the page everywhere to be like, hey, look at what I've done. Can you see my homework? I want you to see my homework. No, read every line of my homework. You know, nobody wants to read all your homework. They just want the feeling that it makes sense. So so in certain places to sort of cheat around that, or to for the nerds who really want to see how it works or want to know, I'd like put appendices, and it's like, okay, here's some more about that. You can go there if you care. If you don't care, I'm not going to clog up you know too much of the text. You can read the text without it. It's fine.
Ashes, I think, is the first book I've done that actually has a glossary, and it has it not because I think it really needs it, but because I had all these notes from my world building that like didn't make it into the text, and I was like, yeah, I'll just type this up nice and put it in the back, right? Like, you know, if you want to go look for it, there it is. But that it's one of those things. Dates in particular are one of those things where I feel like you're kind of screwed either way. If you use real world dates, then people are like, oh, it throws me out of the story. But if you make up an elaborate date system, then it's just so painful to like teach someone.
Yes, yes. Oh, July. So they had Julius Caesar in this world,
right?
You get things like
the fact that I used real world months meant that my book was secretly set on Earth, and I'm like, no, that's how it works. I have a whole theory that goes with this, but it's funny. I was reading, I really love George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, shocker. And I was looking at his books to see how he does this I forgot, how he handles it. He just doesn't do it. There's just no mention of actual dates or time periods or weeks or anything. It's so like neatly elided. I was like, oh my goodness, like how clever is he?
Right.
All right. Should we look at some questions from the
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Sure, let's hop in. What you pick?
I'll pick them here. Okay, well, here's one. The third from Colleen Jess. Can you please pronounce then a word I can't pronounce?
So that's a good translation apparently. Some Welsh speakers tell me. I think it's the Cwn y Wawr. So I'm probably getting it at least slightly wrong. But yeah, for a few of those, I did talk to some Gaelic speakers and Irish speakers for a few things, Welsh for a couple things, and again, there's a difference in that country that Kip never knows about. So readers never need to know why I took some from Irish and why I took some from Welsh. So it's just like, okay, yeah, that's there. It can just look like a mess. That's fine. Doesn't really matter to anything in the text. So and it gave me an excuse to use Welsh also, which I visited Wales when I was in college and was like, what a cool place. And I can't pronounce any of these things.
Yeah, I know.
And I can barely understand people when they're talking to me with their accents, which is also cool, but they're really nice. So I guess I put some Welsh names in both of my into both of my series now. So
that actually segues into this next question, which is, what are some Easter eggs you've used in world building across multiple books and worlds? Do all the characters drink your favorite type of tea or anything like that? So is it Welsh?
Well, I guess that's certainly one of them. I mean, there is a ridiculous number of redheads in my books. I don't know why that has happened. It's clearly coincidental. And there are many more, but they're up to you to discover. How's that, Django?
I've used the name Anaximander for a whole bunch of different ancient things in various books because it was.
Hold on. What was that one of? Was that one of Alexander's scribes?
Not that I know of. I think that's a different one. There's an Anaxander was a historical philosopher actually, and that freaked me out. Okay, so I'm using Anaximander because it was the name. Yeah. It was a joke name from an old role-playing campaign. Right.
Okay.
Where we tried to come up with the most ridiculous fantasy name that we could come up with. And so I used that for a bunch of things. And then Max Gladstone in his Ruin of Angels has an Anaxander, I think named after the Greek, as an ancient philosopher in his country. And I'm like, Max Gladstone, are you incepting me? Like, what's going on?
That's awesome. That's fun.
But that's kind of an Easter egg. It's also just kind of a crazy fantasy name that I like.
Right. That's cool. Do you have any others?
I don't think so that I do on purpose. I mean, there's definitely stuff that ends up in a lot of my books because like I like it, or I'm interested in it. There's always some military stuff and some economic stuff, but like that's not really an Easter egg. That's just where my interests run when I read history and so on. So
I'll get the question once in a while. Like you'll get questions from readers who are like, "You really like the word widdershins, don't you?" Or whatever. I'm like, do I? You know, like they're just and so I probably haven't used it in 3 books now.
I know,
but only because somebody made me feel self-conscious for using it. Like do I use that a lot, or like am I weird, or are you weird for noticing it, or I've had other words that like it's like, okay, that's just part of my active vocabulary. Like I'm not using that word to impress you. You're noticing it because you don't know it. Or you barely know it, and you're like, oh, this word has come up. You know, like in Lightbringer, it's like it's 1.5 million words. It's like, yeah, so this one, you know, obscure word comes up 3 times. It's like, you know, that's not really me beating a dead horse. That's like, dang, that's just okay. There's you know a word in it 3 times. So,
you need to describe. I think in Ship of Smoke and Steel, which is my YA trilogy, my editor told me I was using coruscating too much. And I'm like, but it's the main character's power sends little lightning bolts all over everything. They coruscate. What am I supposed to do? It's such a good descriptive term.
So that brings up a question I was thinking about before. How do you find the world building to be different for a YA novel?
I went about it much the same way. The structure of the novel was a little different. I mean, it's, you know, when I write children's books, and I've written both middle grade and YA, I try not to write down because I always hated it when people did that. And so that's just, you know, I let my editors worry about whether, you know, the language is too advanced for kids. And
yeah,
to their credit, I don't think they've ever told me it was. Oh no, one of my editors said I couldn't use the word gnomon, GNOMON, as the thing that sticks up in the center of a sundial because 12-year-olds wouldn't know what that was. But the structurally, not the structurally, it's a little simpler. So it's one POV. It's just sort of a straight through, no chronological weirdness or anything.
Right.
But world building wise, the only thing I really did that was different in the YA was because I knew that most of the main characters were going to be teenagers. It changes how the magic system works because the magic is much more inborn. The magical powers are much more like they're like X-Men mutant powers because I need people to be able. You know, it can't be magic that you need to study your whole life to be good at.
For 20 years.
Our heroine is going to be 17, then it doesn't work, right? So it changed the kind of story that I was going to do, or kind of magic system I was going with. But like within that, you know, it still has, you know, still sort of build up from the magic to its effects on society. That actually gets at another one of these questions, which is, do you usually start world building from the top, world map, government structure, etc., or from the bottom, what people eat, their names, etc., and how does magic play into it? And I can say, for me, I generally start with some combination of the magic and the general tech level and the climate and, you know, the sort of area that people are living in. Because from that is what gets you things like governments and armies and culture and all that, right? It's based on what you have to work with, you know what crops you can grow and whether there's horses and whether you can sail to other places or whatever. So you've got all that, and then you've got your technology level and, you know, how far along that you've gotten. And then in fantasy you have how the magic works, and sort of those are the elements that any society is going to have had to deal with for their whole history, and so that it has to be kind of built in.
Right. I find that I am not artistic at all, so this part is very painful for me. But I find that drawing a map is incredibly helpful. I am
exactly the same. I have to draw maps, and my ability to like actually make them look nice is nil.
Yeah, it's like that. No, I need to move that. crap, how do I move things? You know, I got to start over or whatever. Because you know, the more history you know, and the more you study things, you're like, oh man, like geography really determines a huge amount of history. Like geography will drive a lot of conflict. Like, oh, here's a wonderful plain where everything grows and there's nothing defensible around it. Like, people are going to fight over this land, you know? Like, okay, so probably there have been fights over this land, or you know, somebody was strong enough to hold that land all the way out to the borders and they held it. You know, and then, oh, this has got a lot of mountains. You know, this is Switzerland. It's like, oh, guess what? Switzerland, hard to take and not really worth it. So that's why Switzerland stays free, because every mile there's another mountain pass. And then there's these tough people who can survive in the mountain passes, and they're going to fight you for every step. And it's like, you know what? Forget it. I don't want Switzerland. So like some of those things will just come together for you, or you know, what is it? Is it the Sudetenland? It's like this is hard. This is hard to hold. You know, people are gonna fight over it. So I find that doing a map at some point early in the world building time is really helpful. And then like where you place, like I start with characters. I start with thematic problems. I start with those kind of conflicts. Those are more interesting to me at the beginning level. So it'd be like, okay, so then where are my people going to be in this world after you kind of get some of the world together? And so those things can kind of give and take, and you can be like, well, if I do this, then this is going to happen to this area of the world, and that sounds really interesting to me. And yeah, so I'm going to put my people right in the middle of that. So there's not a if the person who asked that is an aspiring writer, there's not a right answer. There's just ways to think about it, and ways that might save you some backtracking, but don't try to look like for the way that's going to save you all the backtracking, because you're going to backtrack anyway, and it's okay. It's like you're going to run into dead ends as you're creating, and that's okay. That's just part of it. Yeah, go ahead, Django.
One of the beauties of being a writer, as I always say, is that we're not doing this live, right? That you can undo it. You have your eraser. You take it back. It's fine. Yeah, I was going to say, I often, by the time I get around to doing the world building, I have the story in mind, or at least something like it. So when I'm doing shadow campaigns, I know that I need, you know, it's the Napoleonic War, so I need France and Germany and Russia and Britain, kind of, right? Not right. Literally, but like to occupy the same basic roles in terms of international relations, so that we can have the same basic roles in terms of war. And the same is true in Ashes, you know, that when I set about sort of actually designing the world, I knew the story that I wanted to tell required a few things, right? There's got to be this central order, right, and there's got to be, you know, the Republic and so on.
So another question I had for you, Django, with that, like when you're doing a book that's like influenced, like I would be terrified to try to write a book that's influenced by Star Wars, because Star Wars has been like such a part of my childhood and everybody else's childhood. Like I would be scared of hewing too close to it, or like unconsciously hewing too close to it. Like how do you do that and then also make it your own? I love that you're looking at more complicated like sociocultural things and like stuff with that. But I would be worried that I'd sort of fall into a Star Wars rut, you know, and I'd be like, okay, how have you addressed that, or has that not been a problem at all for you?
I mean, part of it is just that my experience with writing stuff is that you tend to make it your own regardless. That, you know, you'll set out to do something in the vein of X or Y or Z, but it always acquires its own thing. Sure. But I did want to make sure the world building wasn't too close. And so like the biggest choice I made with that story, back when I was conceiving of this, I was like, well, it could be a space opera, right? This could be a thing. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that, because then it would be too close, right? I feel like I would fall into the same storytelling thing. So it's not a space opera. It's an epic fantasy. It's set in one world and one continent even. There's no spaceships. There's no wisecracking robots. And it was just a matter of kind of thinking about it, sort of thinking about the inspiration. And this isn't just Star Wars, but anytime you're sort of inspired by something, which I think is pretty often for most of us, I like to sit down and think, okay, what is it about this? What are the key elements of this that are interesting to me, right? Not in general, but for this specific problem. And so how can I extract those to use in my own thing? And so that helps you from copying the sort of incidental elements or the characters or any of that stuff. You want to think, okay, this sort of societal element or this type of magic system is what I want to think about.
Right.
So, yeah, I was a little nervous when I was first laying it out, but I think by the time I got around to actually writing it and I had done a lot of the world building, I knew it was kind of its own thing. And that's happened to me before. When I did Shadow Campaigns, I was like, my original idea was to do a pretty close allegory of the Napoleonic Wars.
Okay.
Because I had been reading Steve Sterling and David Drake wrote a series called The General, which is about it's a sci-fi retelling of the campaigns of Belisarius. And it's a pretty close match. And I originally thought about doing something like that. But as I wrote it, it just diverged so far and so quickly that I was just like, nah, this is more of a kind of general inspiration rather than any kind of specific event. And so I figured that would happen, and it did.
Yeah, nice. Are you deep into drafting the next book?
I'm actually Shadow Campaigns. Ashes 2 is done.
Oh wow.
The draft is done anyway. My editor is on maternity leave, so congratulations to Brent, as always. But it'll be a little while before she gets back. But we got until next year, so I think we'll be on track for about this time next year, or a little earlier next year, to put out Ashes 2, which doesn't have a title yet. I think it doesn't have a title yet.
Right.
And I'm due to start writing the third one soon. Maybe not soon. And I have like some secret projects that I'm working on, and then the Siege of Rage and Ruin, which is the third book in my YA series, comes out in January, but that's all done and dusted. I'm still waiting on the cover. What are you doing now? Nice. Do you get like a bunch of time off, or are you already working on the next thing?
Time off, man. What's that? I'm deep into the next book.
Is the next book going to be a new thing?
So I'm being a little cagey about that. The next book is going to be set in the Night Angel world.
Okay.
And it's going really well. There's going to be crossover characters from the original Night Angel trilogy.
For a second there, I thought you meant crossover from Lightbringer.
No.
Anderson on us, right? It's gonna be very exciting.
And it's going really well. I am not committing to a particular deadline this time, because I've always written a book about every 2 years, but as I've gone in my career, my books have doubled in length. And then even more, and trying to keep the same publication schedule got incredibly stressful, and so I'm like, okay, that took a lot of the fun out of the writing, or at least certain parts of the writing. So I'm going to try not to do that to myself this time, and but I'm still writing. I'm writing at basically the same pace. I'm hoping that this book will be shorter, but I always hope that this book will be shorter. And I'm really pleased with how it's going. So nothing soon for readers, but but I'm loving it. It's really fun. I had a wonderful, day writing today. And it's been going really great. So despite all these stresses of coronavirus time, it's actually been a pretty good writing time for me.
I hear that from a lot of writers, right? I think like so many things have been canceled that it's like all these distractions, all the conventions, all the vacations, is all just every day. It's just me on my couch.
Oh yeah. Well, see, like I never went to all the conventions and stuff because I always had a deadline, and it was like okay, if I do that, I'm missing this many days. I don't write very well on the road, so I'm taking. I got to prep for it. Okay, that's 5 days out of my writing schedule this year. I can't do it, and I just didn't go to anything. So which was a bummer because I miss my friends. I like seeing people. I like meeting new people. Every once in a while. And I was just like, I got this book to get done. And so it was really, I was working 6 days a week and then sometimes 7 days a week, and your productivity actually starts to plummet when you do that for too long, or at least mine does. So that got pretty awful. So I was like, let's see if we can do this without doing that to myself. So far it's working out great, and I'm really pleased. So I saw that there was a question asking about what are each of us reading right now. So I assume you read a lot of history. Is that true?
I do. In fact, I've been on kind of a history kick recently. Like, I don't know about other people. I found my ability to read fiction has suffered during the pandemic times. My focus is not what it should be. And so I've been doing more history because for some reason I can hold my attention. And so I bounce around a bit. I'm doing some World War II stuff now. So I'm reading a book called Duel of the Eagles, which is about the Battle of Britain. I'm reading a book called Spearhead, which is about a tanker in Germany in 1944, and then I just finished one called Neptune's Inferno, which is about Guadalcanal. But before that, I was reading about the Russo-Japanese War, of all things, which is like this weird. I love some of these weird little historical moments that are like between the big events that everybody knows about, because like technology is often in kind of a weird place. So the Russo-Japanese War, 1905, and like. They have these new battleships, but no one really knows what to do with them yet. And they have machine guns, but nobody really knows what to do with them yet. It's a really interesting story. So that, that's fun. But yeah, it's been a lot of nonfiction lately. I am working, when I do get on fiction, I'm working on Robert Jackson Bennett's Shorefall, which is the sequel to Boundary Side, which I'm really enjoying. But I don't know if you guys can see the pile of books behind me, but that's the overflow pile from the stack on top of the shelves from the shelves.
Right.
I like turn this camera.
Yeah, right.
My light in the way, but you can see my bookshelves and my painting table back there.
Right. Yeah, nice.
What about you? Are you doing like nonfiction, fiction reading? Both?
Like I find that I tend to read, and it's been for a while now. Like I tend to read very little in the genre.
Interesting.
And that's for in probably the past 7 or 8 years. And that's like probably for a couple different reasons. And one is that I find I'm incredibly sensitive to what I'm reading, and like I'll sponge up stuff, and I'll be like, and sometimes that's fine, and sometimes I notice it, and so it's like, oh, okay, that's very like I read Terry Pratchett, and then like I notice my sense of humor is just like very, very Terry Pratchett kind of sense of humor, which is fine, and that's great for a different flavor of humor in the book. But other times I'll be like, wait, did I take that idea from somebody else? And that doesn't feel as good to me, and the other reason is when I'm reading genre fiction, I'm so aware of the shape and the techniques and like what they're doing, and like, oh, I really like how she did this, and oh, that was a perfectly, that was really telling detail, and like, oh, that exposition a little clumsy, and like I'm working the entire time I'm reading, and I already work enough that it just feels like work on top of work, and I just go like, that's not fun for me to like have that analytical part of my brain. And every once in a while, a book will sort of break through that, and I'll just enjoy the heck out of it. And it's like, oh yeah, I love this so much. But a lot of times I don't get there. So I do read a lot of I do read a lot of history. I've really enjoyed a bunch of like listening to lectures, so sort of college level lectures on history. There's a guy named his things are available on Audible. His name is Kenneth Harrell. I think he's a professor of history, obviously, and he does a lot of Middle Eastern and Eastern history. That's really, really fascinating. So I just listened to a course on Alexander the Great that he did, and he's done a bunch of other ones. I listened to one recently. I can't remember the woman's name. Another professor on the Celts.
Have you?
And sorry, go ahead.
Have you listened to Mike Duncan's History of Rome or Revolutions podcast? Because those are really good.
Not.
He's a really good history writer, I guess you'd call him. Historian. I guess he's now, he writes his own books now too, but he does these podcasts. The History of Rome is just the history of Rome, starting from its mythic origins in the 800s BC all the way through 453 AD, one episode after another for 150 episodes or however long it takes. It's pretty great.
Right. No, that's cool. I wrote it down so I can check that out. I'm listening to Saul Stein on writing. I tend to read a lot of writing books. Always looking to kind of polish up my game. And then I just downloaded, but I haven't started reading it yet. Neil Gaiman's new Sandman audiobook, which is a full cast recording, and apparently does a lot of creative things. I was talking with Simon Vance the other day and just exchanged some emails. He's my audiobook narrator, or was for all the.
Such a good narrator. I've heard him in so many things. He's amazing.
He's so good, and so I was asking him these sort of tricky questions about, well, hey, how would we handle this if we did this, or I don't know if he'll be my narrator in the next book, but if I did this in the next audiobook, how would that be narrated? Because that's really weird. And he's like, let me think about that. He said, but you know what? I've actually just been, and apparently he's in the Sandman one that I had already downloaded. And he's like, yeah, I know these guys, and they're doing really cool stuff. So really cool stuff is possible in audiobooks these days. Let me think about that, and I'll get back to you. So I'm hoping to kind of expand my my toolkit and figure out some fun things to do for audiobook listeners who these days, I mean, are spoiled for choice. It's like audiobooks these days are so good.
Well, I hear from so many people that they're reading fewer audiobooks because they don't have a commute anymore. Many of my friends told me this.
The statistics on that I heard is that it took a dive for about a month or two, the audiobook listening, and then it went back up. And it's still back. Like, people stopped listening because of their commutes, and then a bunch of people went, I miss audiobooks, and they're back to listening. Apparently, and I'm trying to remember who told me this. I feel like it was somebody in the it was somebody in the industry. It was an editor who told me that audiobook listening is apparently up. So people maybe having more time are listening on things other than their commutes, which used to be. Where
I haven't had a commute for a while, but I had to adjust. But like, eventually, I got into doing audiobooks during exercise and other times, and kind of got it back into it. Yeah, someone in the chat just said while running, definitely that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So hey, let's. I noticed it is the hour. It's been an hour, and I need to go tuck my daughters into bed. It's story time around at the Weeks household. So how about we take one or two more quick questions and then we call it a night.
Why did neither of you have a ponytail? For me, the answer is my hair doesn't grow that way. This is my terrible quarantine haircut that I had to do myself with a clipper. If I let my hair grow out, I'd have like the Jew afro. Nice. That's who I am, and that's my that's what my hair would look like. So can't really grow the ponytail.
Yeah. I'm just not cool enough to be Joe Dirt, so I skipped on the ponytail. But if I keep writing fantasy for long enough, it is possible. Completely bald on top and then just a ratty little ponytail in the back. So life goals.
As a former software engineer, I know a lot of people like that.
Oh, that's right. It
was more popular in like the early 2000s. There was the programmer look, right?
Oh man. I could mock some fantasy looks, but they might be attached to or might unfortunately be attached to certain real people. So I'll leave that one alone and just mock myself and losing all my hair. So there we have it. And before we close, I wanted to note that our host is Powell's book tonight. Powell's books. They're our local people, and I just heard a rumor that they're now open at least a little bit on the weekends and for very brief periods of time. So if you can go back into Powell's at least a little bit, or that is the scuttlebutt. So so please do check them out. Powell's is my home bookstore. I always love going in there. They're always good to me. Wonderful people.
Whenever I get down to Portland, because it's great.
Yes.
So you can buy our books there from the links on the side. They'll mail them to you, but you can also just buy any of your books and support your local bookstore or Powell's or both.
Absolutely. And if you order either of our books, you can get signed book plates at those links. We'll get you some signed book plates. And I'm also supposed to mention that I have a couple more talks coming up on Tuesday of next week and Tuesday of the following week after that. So Django, thank you very much for chatting with me tonight. It was really nice.
Thank you for having me on. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. And everyone, thank you for showing up. We appreciate it.
We can get to all the questions, but
yes,
time is an illusion.
Right.
I say that to myself all the time now because it feels like nothing changes.
Very Buddhist, right?
It's not really true.
All right. All right. Well, thanks everyone.